He reached into his wallet, ready to give her money, but she shook her head and said the words that stopped his entire world. "I don't need money. I just want a hug, like your daughter probably gets." In that moment, a millionaire met a little girl who asked for something he didn't know he was missing. A hug that would change all of their lives forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The night market was alive with color and sound. Strings of soft yellow lights hung above the rows of food stalls. The scent of roasted corn and sweet pastries drifted through the warm evening air. Laughter echoed from children chasing each other near the fountain. People moved through the crowd slowly, stopping to admire handmade crafts and taste spicy noodles on wooden sticks. Nolan Reed stood out in the middle of it all. Tall and sharp in his dark blazer, he looked like someone who had wandered in from a business meeting. He checked his watch, sighed, and wiped his hands on a silk handkerchief. Everything about him was clean and exact. His shoes shined, his hair neat. His face calm, but distant. He had come to town for a conference. Something about investments and new technologies. But after hours of polite smiles and forced handshakes, he had felt a strange pull to walk. His hotel was nearby. The lights from the market had caught his eye. It reminded him of something far away. Something he could not quite name. He stopped in front of a small cart selling fried dough dipped in sugar. The vendor, a kind-looking man with a beard and a crooked cap, nodded at him. "First time here?" the man asked. Nolan gave a short smile and nodded. "Just passing through," he replied. The vendor reached for a pastry when a soft voice spoke from below. "Hi." Oh. Nolan looked down. A little girl stood beside him. She had curly hair that danced in the wind. But her dress was too small at the sleeves. Her shoes didn't match, but her eyes were steady and bright. She looked up at him like she knew him. Nolan crouched to her level. "Do you need something?" he asked gently. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills. "Are you hungry?" The girl shook her head. She didn't look at the money. She looked at him. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I don't need money," she said. "I just want a hug, like your daughter probably gets." Nolan froze. He felt the words hit like a stone in still water. I don't have a daughter," he said, caught off guard. The girl tilted her head slightly. "Oh," she said softly. "I don't have a dad. Not one who hugs. Not like the other kids at school. They get hugs before class or when they fall down. I just want to know what that feels like." Nolan didn't speak. His throat tightened. The noise of the market faded behind him. He could only hear her voice and his own heartbeat. He remembered something. Being 5, sitting on the porch of a quiet house, waiting for a father who never came. The phone calls from airports, the gifts without cards, it's always something missing. He blinked back the memory and looked at the girl again. She was still standing there, arms at her sides, waiting slowly. Nolan opened his arms. "Would it be okay if I gave you a hug?" he asked. She stepped forward without a word. Her small arms wrapped around his neck. She was warm, weightless, but the feeling in his chest was heavy. It was something old, something sad and deep and long forgotten. He hugged her tightly, not like a stranger, not like someone passing through. He hugged her like someone who needed it just as much. Her hair smelled like strawberries. He closed his eyes. Footsteps approached. A woman's voice called out, firm but calm. "Emma." Looked up. A woman stood nearby holding a small paper bag. Her hair was tied back, her clothes were simple. Her face was striking in a tired way. Strong eyes. Straight mouth. She paused when she saw her daughter in a stranger's arms. Her voice was steady. "Who are you?" Nolan gently let go of Emma and stood up. "It's just someone passing through," he said. The woman studied him for a long moment. Her eyes didn't blink. She looked down at Emma, who smiled up at her. "He gave me a hug," the girl said proudly. "Like the ones other kids get." The woman's shoulders relaxed a little. She reached for her daughter's hand. "Come on," she said gently.
Babe.
Emma nodded but turned back to Nolan. "Thank you," she said. Nolan smiled. "You're welcome." He turned back to the cart. Vendor handed him the pastry, now slightly cooled. Nolan passed it down to Emma.
Ah, sweet.
Like hugs, he said quietly. Her eyes lit up. She grinned and took a bite. Then she walked away beside her mother, swinging their joined hands between them. Nolan stood there for a moment longer. He looked around at the lights, the laughter, the smell of warm bread. But all he could hear was her voice. I just want a hug. Walked back through the market, past the lanterns and the music, past the stalls and the strangers. But something had changed in him, something small, something real, and he knew he would be back. Nolan Reed came back to the market the next Friday night. He had told himself he was only curious, just wanted to walk and breathe and maybe buy another pastry. But as he stepped under the glowing lanterns again, he knew it wasn't true. He was there for the little girl, for the way her voice had stayed with him all week. The market looked the same. Strings of lights swayed above, music played from a speaker hidden somewhere between the stalls. Families gathered near food carts, couples laughed over skewers of grilled meat, and Nolan walked slower this time, not rushing. He took his time, looking carefully near the far end of the market. Tucked between two large plants in clay pots, he saw her, Emma, sitting cross-legged on a small mat behind a folding table. In front of her were drawings, bracelets made of thread. In tiny notebooks with hand-drawn covers behind her stood the woman from before. Her hair was pulled back again, and she wore a loose sweater and jeans with frayed hems. She was arranging the bracelets with care, her fingers moving like someone who had done this 100 times. Nolan hesitated, then stepped forward. "Hi," he said, his voice quiet. Emma looked up first. Her face lit up instantly. "It's you," she said with a big smile. "The hug guy," Nolan laughed. "I guess that's me." The woman turned to look at him. Her eyes met his, with the same guarded strength as before. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either, just studied him carefully. "I'm Nolan," he said, holding out a hand. She paused, then shook it. "Mira," she replied. He picked up one of the bracelets, blue with tiny silver beads. "How much?" he asked. $5, she said simply. He pulled out a 10 and placed it in the tin box on the corner of the table. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Can I show him my picture?" She whispered. Myra gave a small nod. Emma turned her sketchpad toward Nolan. On the page was a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures stood under a yellow sun. One tall, one medium, one small. Above them floated a pink heart. "That's me," Emma said, pointing. "That's Mommy. And that's someone I wished for." Nolan felt his breath catch. He looked up. Mira was watching her daughter, her expression unreadable. She didn't explain the picture. She didn't need to. "You're very good at drawing," Nolan said softly. Emma grinned. "I draw every day." He stayed at the stall longer than he planned. They talked about simple things, the weather, the food at the market. Nolan mentioned he lived in the city, not far away. Mira spoke of her handmade crafts. She said she used to study art, wanted to illustrate children's books. But life, she said, had other ideas. Emma came early, she added, adjusting a stack of bookmarks and alone. "I didn't get to finish school," Nolan nodded. He didn't press. Her voice was calm, not bitter, just honest. "I work at a diner some nights," she said. "Other nights, we come here. It keeps us going." Nolan looked at her hands. Strong, careful, tired. He imagined them once painting gentle forests and fairy tale animals. Now they tied knots and folded paper into stars. Emma handed him one of those stars, made from shiny gold paper. "For you," she said. He took it, smiling. "Thank you." The next weekend, Nolan came again, brought a bag of fresh fruit and a box of coloring pencils. He set them beside the stall without saying much. Emma squealed with joy. Mira said nothing, but she didn't stop him. Each week he returned, never with fanfare, just quiet visits. Sometimes he brought books, other times warm soup or a new sketch pad. Mira accepted them without words. Her eyes began to soften when She saw him arrive. They started sharing street food after the market closed. Grilled corn, small bowls of noodles. They sat near the curb while Emma doodled beside them. They didn't talk much. But the silence wasn't awkward. It felt calm, easy. Nolan found himself looking forward to these nights. He stopped staying late at work, started turning off his phone earlier. Still wore nice clothes, but now they were softer, less stiff, and more human. Emma called him Mr. Smile one evening. When he asked why, she said, "Because you smile with your eyes. Even when your mouth doesn't remember." Nolan had never heard anything like that. And for the first time in years, he didn't know how to respond. He just laughed. And that laugh felt different. Like it came from somewhere deep. He began to notice things. How Myra always straightened the table first, before anything else. How she wiped each notebook cover gently, before setting it down. How she watched her daughter, with a kind of quiet worry, always alert, always ready. He noticed how Emma drew the same picture in new ways each week. The three figures always standing under the same sky. Always together. One night as they were packing up, Nolan asked Mira, "Do you ever get tired?" Emma, who was humming as she put away her crayons. Then she said, "As long as she keeps smiling, I don't get tired." Nolan nodded, but the words stayed with him long after he got home. He lay awake that night thinking of a woman who worked 2 jobs and smiled anyway. Of a little girl who asked for nothing but a hug. And of a market filled with lanterns and soft voices. His world had been full of noise before. Boardrooms, deadlines, voices that never paused. But now, every Friday, in a corner of a crowded market, Nolan had found something new, a silence that felt like peace, and he wasn't ready to let it go. The sky turned gray before the sun could fully set. Dark clouds rolled in over the rooftops. As the wind picked up, rustling signs and lifting napkins off tables, vendors at the night market began closing early. Rain was coming. The smell of it filled the air. Nolan checked his phone. A message blinked from his assistant about a client. "Meeting next week." He didn't answer. Instead, he slipped the phone into his pocket and pulled up his hood. The market was nearly empty now. Most people had left, but he stayed. Something told him he should. He walked to the usual corner, passing the closed food stalls and flickering lanterns. The bracelet table was gone. The space stood bare under the dim lights. He looked around. For the first time in weeks, he didn't see them. No Emma. No Mira. His eyes scanned the street, and then he spotted them. Across the road, under a metal bus stop shelter, sat Myra with Emma curled in her lap. The child's face was pale, her arms limp. Myra's arm held her close, rocking gently. Nolan ran over, crossing the wet road without care. "What's wrong?" he asked. Myra looked up, her face drawn and worried. "She's burning up," she said. Her fever came fast. "I tried the clinic, but they were full. The wait was too long. I was going to try again in the morning." Nolan didn't hesitate. "Come with me," he said. "I have a car." She looked unsure for a second, but then nodded. Together they rushed to the parking lot. The rain had started now, falling hard and cold. Nolan opened the back door, and Mira climbed in with Emma still wrapped in her arms. They drove in silence. The windshield wipers moving fast. Nolan gripped the wheel tightly, kept glancing in the mirror. Emma's head rested on her mother's shoulder, her eyes half closed. At the hospital, nurses moved quickly. Mira stayed by Emma's side, answering questions, signing forms. Stood close, but silent. When they wheeled Emma into a room, he followed without a word. Later that night, Emma lay in a small hospital bed, an IV taped gently to her arm. Monitors beeped softly. The lights were dim. Mira sat on one side, her shoulders tense. Nolan sat on the other, hands folded. He reached out and took Emma's tiny hand. Her fingers twitched slightly. She opened her eyes just a little. "Want a story?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. She nodded slowly, so Nolan began to speak. Not about business or work or the news. He made up a story, right there in the quiet room. It was about a little bunny who got lost in the rain but found her way home by following the sound of laughter. She met a hedgehog who told jokes and a squirrel who shared hot cocoa under a tree. Together, they made a map of stars out of flour. Petal's Mira watched him the whole time. Her expression was soft but tired. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. Emma smiled weakly and squeezed his hand, and she drifted off to sleep. Nolan stayed in that chair. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't check the time. He just sat there, one hand holding Emma's, the other resting on his knee. Myra leaned back, eyes closing for just a moment. When morning came, Emma was stronger. The doctor smiled and said the fever had broken. She just needed rest. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world looked clean. New. A few days later, they were back at the market. This time, Nolan brought warm soup in paper cups and a blanket for Emma to sit on. She was still tired but cheerful. She showed him a new drawing. It was of the hospital room. A bunny on one side, tall man on the other. And in the middle, a little girl with a band-aid and a big smile. "That's you," she said, pointing. To the tall man, "You stayed." Nolan looked at Mira. She didn't speak, but she smiled, just a little. From that night on, he became part of their world in a way that felt real. He came to the market often. Sometimes he brought books. Other times a new spoon for Emma's drawings. Never big things. Always simple, always thoughtful. Mira never asked for anything. She rarely said thank you out loud. But her eyes changed. They were softer now, less guarded. They began sharing more than just food. Little stories, quiet jokes, memories. Nolan found himself laughing more, sleeping better, working less. His home felt different now, emptier somehow, not in a sad way. In a way that made space for something better. One evening, as they sat near the edge of the market, Emma curled up beside them, drawing a picture of stars. Nolan looked at Mira. "I never knew what it meant to be a dad," he said softly. "I had one, but he was always busy, always away." Mira listened. "I used to watch the other kids at school run into their father's arms. I pretended I didn't care, but I did." There was a long pause. "I guess that makes two of us," Mira said quietly. "Mine left when I was 9, never came back." They didn't say anything for a while. The only sound was the hum of the market and the scratch of crayons on paper. Emma held up her new drawing. 3 people sitting under a sky full of paper stars. "This is us," she said, and Nolan felt something shift deep inside him. It's not a loud moment. It's not dramatic. Just a quiet knowing. He had found something worth staying for. The weather had started to change. Summer's brightness faded into the softer light of early fall. The leaves along the streets turned gold and orange. Sweaters replaced short sleeves. The market felt different too. Still full of life, but quieter now. Slower. Nolan still came every week. Not out of habit, but out of something deeper. He no longer walked with that same distance in his eyes. Now he stopped to talk to the vendors. He helped Emma pick out the ripest fruit. He laughed more. He smiled without trying. He brought a small heater for Mira's stall and a jar of honey for her tea. Sometimes he brought new markers for Emma, or a book he thought they'd both enjoy. He never made it about charity. He just brought what he thought might help. Emma had started calling him Mr. Warm. It began during a picnic in the park when she said, "He brings warm food and warm hugs and warm eyes." The name stuck. Nolan didn't mind. He kind of liked it. Mira didn't say much about it. But she started to meet his gaze longer. Her voice, once careful, was softer now. Sometimes she shared stories from her day. Sometimes she just listened while he talked about his week. She didn't pretend. She didn't flatter. She just showed up. That made all the difference. They never called it anything. Not love. Not a family. Not a relationship. They just kept showing up. Again and again. One night, they sat on a bench near the river. Emma had fallen asleep, her head resting on Nolan's arm. The sky above them was turning a deep blue dot. Mira sipped her coffee. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the cup. "I'm scared," she said suddenly. Nolan turned to her. "Of what?" "Letting you in," she said quietly. "I am already." sees you as someone permanent. I'm scared that if you walk away, I'll have to explain why someone she trusted is gone. Nolan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded flyer. It was for a children's art exhibit at a small gallery downtown. I signed her up, he said. Hope that's okay. I just thought people should see her work. Myra stared at the paper. Her hand shook slightly. On the night of the exhibit, Emma wore a little dress with 2 braids down her back. Nolan was already at the door waiting, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. They walked in together, the 3 of them. Emma's drawings were framed and hanging on a wall near the back. Nolan had arrived early to set everything up. He had even written her name in gold ink under each one. Emma beamed with pride. She turned to the room and said, "This is my new house. It's Mommy, that's Mr. Warm, and that's me." Some people chuckled. Others wiped their eyes. Myra looked at Nolan. For once, she didn't look away. She didn't hide the feeling in her eyes. It was trust. It was quiet love. After the show, they walked home slowly. Emma skipped ahead with her drawing. Tucked under her arm, Mira stopped suddenly. Right in the middle of the sidewalk. "She's never drawn anyone in our house before," she said. Nolan smiled. "She's got good taste," Mira laughed. Then she looked at him seriously. "I'm still scared," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I'm trying," she added. "I see that," he said. They walked in silence after that. Not awkward silence. Soft silence. The kind that speaks without words. Weeks passed like falling leaves, slow and gentle. Nolan started spending more days at their home. He helped build a small studio in the backyard where Mira began teaching art to neighborhood kids. She named it Little Light Studio. The sign was painted by Emma. Nolan worked from a small desk near the kitchen now. Still ran his business, but he didn't chase it the same way. He made breakfast on weekends, read books with Emma, fixed broken shelves, told silly stories. Emma told everyone she had 2 homes now. One in her heart and one with a garden and a dad who made pancakes shaped like animals. Her favorite shirt was a white tee with hand-drawn letters. It said, "Being hugged is my superpower." On her 6th birthday, they had a party in the backyard. Balloons hung from the fence. The cake looked like a giant crayon box. Kids ran around with paper crowns. Music played from a little speaker on the porch near the end of the party. Emma stood on a small stool in the middle of the yard. She held a note in one hand and a lollipop in the other. "I have something to say," she announced proudly. Everyone went quiet. "A long time ago, I didn't have a daddy. Used to pretend I didn't care, but I did. I wished for one hug. Just one. Now I have a hug that never lets go." The yard filled with applause. Some people clapped. Others wiped their eyes. Mira reached for Nolan's hand and held it tight. Nolan stepped forward and lifted Emma off the stool. He hugged her close. Then he reached for Mira and pulled her in too. The 3 of them stood in the middle of the yard, wrapped in each other's arms. Nolan whispered, "I finally learned how to love, one hug at a time," and he meant it. Because real love doesn't have to be loud, it just has to stay. And he wasn't going anywhere.